Kinesiology 223, Chapter 11, Presentation number 3, Nonverbal Messaging. And the book here, as it starts to talk about nonverbal messaging, we're very well aware of the words that come out of our mouth. Don't you hear the words that are coming out of my mouth? But sometimes we're just not aware of the nonverbal cueing that we give. And it's really a combination of several different things. And the book kind of outlines these, and they do a pretty good job of it. But nonverbal communication is anywhere between 50 to 70% of the information conveyed. Even though, I can churn out just basically lecture after lecture after lecture, I'm talking verbally, there's a nonverbal component that's also included. Now, the difficult part that you have is, like in this environment, the nonverbal part is very small. It's just this, little circle here on the screen. You can see my hand gestures every once in a while, and also you can kind of hear the intonation in my voice and maybe see some facial gestures. I mean, sometimes as instructors, we do things a little bit overly dramatic in the sterile environment that is online learning. But that's done with purpose to be able to kind of convey message a little bit better and be able to have some nonverbal cueing. But we'll dig into this a little bit further and see what the book has to say here. So they list these styles: physical appearance, posture, gestures, body position, touching, facial expressions, and voice characteristics. And we'll dig into each one of these here in a moment. So with physical appearance, it's kind of how you just look and how you present yourself, how you're dressed, how you stand, how you carry yourself. Kind of like, are you somebody who is neat and clean, kind of sloppy? A lot of situations, especially like a job interview, you have to go in looking like a slob. You're probably going to be treated as such. But if you go in looking like crisp, neat, got your suit nice and pressed, your shirt's tight, nice fit, got your tie on just right, yeah, now you're sending the right message that you're ready to go for this interview. When they talk about posture, they talk about posture in the terms of how we carry ourselves and our gait. And, oftentimes people just have these posture issues anyways, but I just want to point a few things out here. When you're talking about posture, you kind of think of like anatomical position with palms forward. But if you're just thinking in terms of like chest high, back flat, eyes out on the horizon, as opposed to somebody, who's staring down at their shoes, in essence, when your eyes are forward, you're standing nice and tall, ear over shoulder, shoulder over hip, hip over knee, you look like an exclamation point. Nice. When you're stooped over, shoulders are forward, hips are slouched, like you've been sitting all day, which is so much the case, you look like a question mark. You want to look like an exclamation point, not a question mark. Just saying. They talk a little bit in the book, though, like when you're in a sporting type of environment, how that gives nonverbal cueing to your opponent. And they talk about things like, these are things I'm sure you've all seen if you've ever played a sport. Your opponent has hands on their knees, their head position stooped down. They're kind of carrying themselves with a rounded over position as they're trying to figure out how you just made that great cross-court shot. And it's how the person carries themselves in between plays or sets or points that kind of matters. And the concept of doing the best that you can when nobody is looking kind of holds true here, because you might be on the field and you're just kind of taking a little time out and standing there looking all stooped over, but you're sending some very clear body language to the opponents, but also your coach and your teammates. So you have to be cognizant of that. With gestures and body position, there's many different studies to describe posturing in business. You're sitting at a table and you're trying to figure out who the alpha is as a table. Maybe you just kind of sit and you put your hand to your chin and just kind of take the posture of like you're thinking through something, or you fold your arms at the table, or you change your body position slightly. And while you're sitting at the table, you can see who else mimics those same movement patterns. It's kind of like on a sly way to determine if you're the alpha or not. And many times you might be that person, you just don't know it yet. And as you start to, if you start to do research into this, you'll find studies where like there's a bunch of Japanese businessmen sitting around a conference table, and the person who is the lead salesperson is having a cigarette, because you can smoke at the table, or at a time you could smoke at the table. He's having a cigarette, and his subordinate, who's sitting 2 chairs down from him, just nonchalantly, while his boss is smoking a cigarette, puts his hands to his face and kind of holds that posture, because he's mirroring what his boss is doing by holding a cigarette. It's interesting stuff to see. So in that situation, you can clearly see who's the alpha and who is the beta in that case, or the backup person. Now, posturing is the concept that you're delivering these nonverbal cues and these nonverbal messages, and you start to see who picks up on them and who's receptive to this nonverbal cueing. And I can't stress this enough. Like if you're on a basketball court or a soccer field and your nonverbal cueing is positive, we're going to win, I'm marching forward, I'm feeling good, I'm feeling dominant in my sport, you know what? It just might spill over to your teammates. And so you may have to be the one to be the alpha to be able to, long story short, present that posturing and present that type of physical presence, and your teammates will then just, without even thinking about it, jump on board with you. Just going to say, sometimes you can use this as a tool at the conference table, but also on the basketball court. Now, with touching, it's a cueing technique that I use very much with my clients. I teach it in my 234 class, and it's a mountain of nonverbal communication. If I go to a client and they're doing a seated row and I jab them in the back with one finger, poop, that's going to give a different response than if I kind of jab them with four fingers, if I put my palm flat on their back, if I grab their shoulders, if I grab their shoulders and I actually pull back and I get them in better posture where we're doing what's called retraction. The body responds differently to a poke, to a flat hand, to fingertips and thumbs. And it's a technique that takes a little bit of time to practice and a lot of time to practice and to master. And, when you're talking about touch and touch technique in personal training, it's something where it has to be purposeful and professional. I can't imagine there being like an office environment situation where it's purposeful and professional to touch your coworker. Just saying, maybe in a physical therapy clinic, perhaps in strength and conditioning. But usually that's not the norm. So just use caution with this. But understand that you have to be one in the position to be able to be the one who can provide that type of touch training, or have your hands on a client or a peer. And the second part of this is you have to use some verbal communication to ask, all right, I'm going to put my hands on your shoulders. Is that okay if I go ahead and just give you a couple tactile cues to get your body in place? So you have to use the verbal to ask for the permission to do the nonverbal. Just keep that in the back of your mind if you get into something that requires a hands-on type of tactile response. Now, if you want to connect with the audience, you definitely have to have eye contact, and different types of eye contact. If you're in a room, you might be darting all over the place. Sometimes it's more effective just to have a slower, what's called iambic pentameter, where you talk a little bit slower, you're a little bit more deliberate. You kind of work yourself around the room as you're talking, and you try to hold contact. And though it might not be with the exact same person every time, you're kind of working the room as you're giving your presentation, right? For this, I spend a lot of my time staring right here. I'm staring at the screen as I'm talking through the notes. So it's a little bit different in what we're doing here, because this is in essence a one person on one-to-one, because each of you are sitting behind a screen or in front of a screen. And in a classroom environment, it might be like 1, in our case, to 24 students. So it's a little different. But you use facial expression and eye contact with purpose to be able to help you hold an audience and deliver your message. But the other part of it is, if you have your eyes up and you're reading the room, you can see if your message is hitting the mark or not. It's also part of this whole process. Now, you should be able to have the ability to have good command of the room. And as a coach, it'll be implied that you're the one that has the command of the room. I will say it will also be a case where when you're with your particular team or unit area, you'll have command of that room. And even in a one-on-one environment, you'll have command of that room as well. But in a one-on-one, it's a little bit different animal when you're talking one-on-one, right? Because there's more of a dialogue there. But when you look at this, what you're really trying to do, like when you have a large lecture hall, you're trying to make this very much a situation where it's the coach and the person, or the instructor and the student. You're trying to reach that student when you talk with them, and you're holding eye contact around the room, and you do your best to try to reach everybody. But in some cases, the people who are receiving the message, but just might have their head down and they're not even paying attention. So as a result, we have many different distractions in society that kind of like take away from our ability to learn how to be focused and really have good eye contact and be able to have proper facial expression. They talk in the book, when you have people who are kind of like uncomfortable or embarrassed, they tend to avoid direct eye contact and they look away. I would tell you that from a societal standpoint, because so many people spend so much time getting their dopamine hit from their phone, that they spend a lot of time here and they really don't have the attention span to be able to hold that eye contact for a while. And I'm telling you, when you go from here and you go to apply for your job, if you're able to sit across a table from somebody and hold eye contact with them and have a conversation, it'll pay dividends for you, because they'll be so used to and accustomed to interviewing people who just can't do it. I mean, they're so distracted by everything else in the room that they can't hold that eye contact. Now, with other things concerning facial expression, they talk about, the how the eyes actually articulate, but also just something as simple as having a smile, right? And being able to have like the smile as a universal bridge across language barriers. I get that. I understand that. You would be a little bit of a sociopath if you were smiling while you were yelling at your athletes to tell them to do a better job, right? It just doesn't work like that. So realize that when they talk about stuff like this, that the smile is a universal bridge, they're probably talking about it more in the context of saying hello to somebody, introducing yourself. And when you're in a coached environment, it's a little bit different animal, because not everything's just rainbows and unicorns, right? Sometimes you got to get after your athletes. Nonverbal voice characteristics. I talked about this a little bit earlier. It's not what you say, but how you say it. And this is a pretty monotone presentation structure that we have here. And I'm talking pretty much in the same tone, same inflection, same kind of, as I mentioned before, iambic pentameter, the same kind of flow, except when I run out of time and I really have to cram a lot of content in the last 2 slides. But the voice itself, beyond the words that you're delivering, also has the ability to convey information in terms of volume, the tone. It's kind of like the what you say, how you say, like I said, but you got to understand that this is different than the words that you're saying in terms of communication. These are the non-communicative parts that are kind of like, they classify this as nonverbal. And I would say it's a little bit verbal, right? It's just, you're talking more about how you say as opposed to what you say. All right, guys. So with that, I'm going to break out from this one and go into the next presentation.